So welcome everybody. Welcome to my session at this year's adaptTo with the title, Don't Use the Repository Structure as Your Primary Abstraction. I want to tell you a little bit about my project experience over the last years where I saw that often very low-level features have been used in your AEM projects. And these features were often used in a way that they hard code a repository structure and implement this repository structure more or less in your code. And on top of that, these are often very hard to use and quite error prone. I want to show you in this talk a suggestion how you can overcome this problem when you introduce a proper domain abstraction. So who am I? I'm Jörg. I'm working as an architect for Adobe for now more than 10 years, and in the area probably about 15 years. Okay, so let's just go into the topic. So what is the problem I want to address? One of the things I've seen in this AEM project, I've seen that the only accepted abstractions are the one provided by AEM, and these are pages and assets. There are no other abstractions in AEM which are often used next to the even more low-level stuff, resources, nodes, and properties. But there is nothing like a site or something. So missing abstractions, there are a lot of them. So first of all, the site, which is quite obvious. There is AEM sites as a module, but there is no site. No site class, no site object, no site abstraction. You just have a bunch of pages and you just say, okay, this one is a home page, this is a product page, and these are product category pages, but there are no such things in AEM projects. It means when you look in the API, you don't find the product or product category. And unfortunately, when I look into this product code and the product design, I don't find them either. It's nothing which has been added by the project. That means if you're working on a website which wants to show products, I don't find a product page. I find maybe a product template, but that's it. I don't find a product class where I can say, okay, what's the name of the product? I don't find a product category abstraction or say an API where I can say, give me all products of that category. It's just not there. Not in the product, not in the project. And from my point of view, this is a pretty bad situation. So when we have models, and when we talk about models, we mostly talk of Sling models and we talk of UI models. And if we want to model something else like a product or a site, we talk about resources, we talk about nodes, we talk about pages, and on top a lot of utility functionality. And very often these structures are hard-coded. That means, okay, below the product category page, there are the products. Of course, this works as long as you follow this structure, but this is no implicit contract made. It's a lot of implicit assumptions, and all of these make evolution very hard. It means if you want to change your repository structure once, you need to touch a lot of code and you even don't know which code at all. You need to go through all of your code. That's the reality. So in this case, if you have this hard-coded structure, if you have this hard-coded once, it will stay that way and it will never change. It cannot change. I call this CRXDE-driven development because you just go from a specific page, you go from a specific location and know, okay, I have to go into that direction. I need to go to the content, to brand, then I need to attach the country string. Of course, the country string has a slash or not. Okay, then I need to add a slash, add a language, and then add the home page name. And then, of course, I do get resource on this path. So this is not really, well, not really sustainable. Next to all the errors it can be in there. So I want to give you an example of this, what I call it an anti-pattern. The example is very simple, and you probably have coded it at least once on your own. Get the contact address which is stored on the site level. For example, because you need to display it at the bottom of every page. You need to display the contact address. And this is, of course, it's stored on the site level because it's global. It will not change on a page. So what is a typical, how does typical code look like? First of all, I have a get site root utility function. I added a resource, I get back a page. Okay, typically iterate up the tree until the root page is found. Okay, no matter, don't talk about how the root pages are actually identified. Maybe you compare it to a hard-coded template type. And then the next thing is, okay, you use this function, you iterate up the tree, get the root node, and then, okay, okay, my settings are all stored on the child node or child page to the root page, and then there it is stored at the contact address property. Okay, what can go wrong? A lot. First of all, we have two potential NPEs. Null pointer exception, where when, for example, if this page root does not exist, well, if this settings page does not exist or it's called differently, we will get a null you get back a null pointer the same way as the site root does not exist. And of course, settings get value map could also it could not return null, but it could return null. The get could return null. So actually, what else? First, the next thing is that we have hard-coded repository structures. We assume that the site root is a page. Well, could be obvious, but it could also just be a simple anti-unstructured. Then we assume that this get child, where the settings are stored, it's child to the root node, and it's called settings. And then it's a page, it's not an anti-unstructured. And then we assume that this is a contact address property in there. Okay, a lot of stuff which typically works quite well, but as soon as you start to restructure your application, or you want to introduce, for example, content-aware configurations where you want to store this somewhere else, you basically need to find all these occurrences of this code pattern, and you need to change them. And actually, these are very hard to find because the code does not always look like this, or is encapsulated into a utility function. Okay, what could a better version of this look like? So I just build it here in a way that I just say, okay, there must be a site class, and I can adapt the current page to it, and then from the site class I can map and basically get the property. Now, what's the difference here? First of all, I have here all my error handling included. That means I don't get null pointers, yeah, I even get a default value, and I don't make any assumptions about the type of anything. I don't say that the site is a resource. I don't make assumption that the site is a page. It could be anything. I don't care. I also don't care if this contact address is stored at the value map or at which value map. Basically, we could hide context-aware configuration behind it as well. It just doesn't matter. So it's easier to refactor. It's easier to reason about this. What is this code doing? It's also easier to debug just because we introduced the site class and we don't do anything else. We just don't rely on the page structure anymore. And that's a very, very important thing when you start to think about changing your content structure and changing your code. So Our goal should be, whenever we implement code, we should avoid using resources when better abstractions are available. That means don't use resources when you have a page and you know you have a page. Don't use resources when you have an asset. And even if there are no better abstractions available, just create them. Nothing prevents you from creating a site class or a product class. The most important thing is you shouldn't deal with paths. Not because paths are bad, but the way how a path as a string is constructed is typical. It's not really. It's hard because you need to foresee all the eventualities. Is a slash there or is a slash missing? How do I deal with the missing thing? What if a string is one of the elements is null or empty, and so on. And especially error cases should be easy to spot and to deal with. And especially when you deal with paths in a way with strings, it's not really easy. It's quite obvious that something can go wrong, but you don't want to write so much code. Maybe Georg's your Sling URI builder can help here, but unless this is widely used, just don't do that. Use abstractions when you have available. So the end thing is you should build domain objects. You should build reusable parts where you just can assure that something will return not null or something will return something empty, and you just know it is there. And otherwise, if it's not there, it just throws a reasonable exception. So how do you model all these abstractions? Because as I said, we have only pages and assets, and these are only just the building blocks and the fundamental pieces of a website. But in normally all cases, you know the domain models already because you encounter them during the discovery phase of the project. And instead of just using as a way to describe a feature or to describe a concept, just model them explicitly in your code as well. Build a page, a site class, build a product class, build a product category class, or whatever domain model or thing you encounter during your discovery phase. Just model them explicitly and make them an interface and think about what you need to do with them. And if they are represented in the repository, and a lot of them are represented in the repository, make them available via adaptTo. Because if they are just available from some unknown factory classes, no one will use them. If you just say, okay, adapt resource to whatever feature you want to have, that probably gets better attraction, and it's probably better used by your fellow developers. So what's the benefit of it? First of all, practice dry method. Do not repeat yourself, because you can just avoid all these get me the site root utility methods, which are scattered across the code base, and basically every developer is creating one or two versions of this. And of course, then centralize and harmonize the validation of your constraints, because okay, when I get a product class, an instance of a product class, it's actually a product class. It's just not some random resource which sits at the correct location, but it's actually not a product. And then, of course, refactoring of content and code gets much easier because you just need to change these abstractions. So an example. I don't do demos because I'm not showing you, hopefully I don't show you something new, but I can only give you an example. So one of the missing concepts is the site object in AM. You build sites, everyone builds sites, but there is no site. So I just took as example the typical 3-level structure: brand site, country site, language site, which is very traditional. Everyone is using them. So why isn't it reflected? So typical operations, what we need, okay, is to what country belongs the current page? Is the page available in other languages? What's the contact address with fallbacks and all the stuff? So there are a lot of typical operations, and it would be quite nice if we would have a thing like a brand site, country site, language site. Why isn't it there? Let's build it ourselves. So first of all, when we start to think about it, let's build an API. Okay, how could this API be used in a way like this here? To what country belongs the current page? It's just as easy as this. You just adapt to countryside class and ask, okay, get localized country name. I don't know. I don't care how it is implemented. ISO code, node names, JCR language. I don't care. Just give me the country name. And then we could also get the ISO code, whatever. So the countryside object here just takes care of all of that. It's not rocket science, not at all. But I've seen in too many cases situations where someone took the path, separated it by a slash, and then took the fourth level of it. Okay, my node name on the fourth level is country. Okay, it's working as long as you don't change your repository structure. And if you think about changing repository structure, you need to find all this code. Okay, if we want to display the navigation, okay, this page in a different language, okay, first ask, okay, what is this available in other languages and in what pages? So it could be as simple as this. Typically, I found a lot of more code. But here, everything is just hidden behind the abstraction of a language side and a country side class, where I just say, okay, I just invoke some randomly created, or I use the methods provided by these countries, by these objects. And here it doesn't matter if that country side is represented by a page, if this is represented by an NT unstructured, or if it's not represented at all. It doesn't matter. I have the code here on my GitHub account, so it's quite simple. So if we want to have build adapter classes for the language side and for the country side, so it's not that hard to understand, and the APIs are pretty simple actually. But just having this kind of abstractions available gives you much more confidence in your code, because you can just test these abstractions and just build on top of it, and you never know, okay, if this resource return, is this a JCR content node resource of a page, or is this a CQ page resource? It's so many redundancy can be eliminated, and the code can be made much more robust when you use proper abstraction. Okay, so remember our goals. We should really avoid using resources when better abstractions are available. And sometimes there are, sometimes they're not. And if they're not available, create them. Saves you so much time and makes your code much more robust to maintain and to bug fix. And create them. It's not that you don't have these and that you are not aware of these and there are no abstractions. There are abstractions. There will always be abstractions. And never deal with paths. It's just hard. With this, when you have a path in there, you really hard code the repository structure. Then you do CRXDE driven development, and that's something which does not scale and it's also something which just works in the beginning of a project, but if you think about 2 or 3 years later on, when something needs to change, it's going to bite you. Error cases should be easy to spot. As said, if you just do these string concatenations, you need to check everything for nulls and so on. So my call to action for you is to identify the concept you are constantly using in your daily discussions. You are talking about sites. You're talking about language sites. You're talking about products. You're talking about product categories and all the relations between them. But I don't find them in the code bases. No, never. I've never seen them. And I really, really want you to implement these in your code bases because it makes such life so much easier. And use the adapter pattern, the adaptTo pattern, to make them universally available. If you have something in your repository, you don't want to use helper functionality like create product from resource or something like that. Just use adaptTo. That makes life so much easier, and it can help you so much to get that stuff done. Okay, so now we're over. Let's head over to the Q&A part. I have here a question from Christian. Do you have any hints on how to encourage people to create these abstractions? Most often people say, I know how I could use it better, but I have no time. Even senior devs, almost anyone sees a problem, but it's really hard to enforce these good habits. Yeah, agree. I think the only way you can really encourage people to do that is first you have to make it easy to use. So these objects should really be beneficial. It just shouldn't be just a thin wrapper around a value map. And the next thing is code reviews. I think that's the only way you can force people to make use of them, because without, then they just use whatever they would like to use. And then you end up with this ton of utility functions. So, but I think that's the only 2 recommendations I can make. Then Daniel asked in the solution example. In the solution example, the adaptTo method can also return null. Why not use something like model factory? Good question. Model factory will throw you an exception if I recall correctly. It depends a little bit. Some people would prefer catching exceptions. Other, like I do, I got a fan of optional and hide everything behind a big optional. But in the end, yeah, adaptTo can return null, and if you really should make sure that you catch all these. But yeah, in the end, if you can just hide 10 null checks behind a single null check, I think it's even better, because I don't like these huge cascades of if something not 0, then. But in the end, model factory or adaptTo, yeah, doesn't really matter. Both are pretty much the same. The question, is there a performance impact of using adaptTo method too often? Yeah, good question. Honestly, I've never come across a performance impact because of that, unless these adaptive factories are really too complex. But if we just have here, as for example, in this example here, in this code example of the language side class, it's just here that this basically the thing is just the adapter just invokes the constructor of this language side import class, and here basically it's just does the fill data, so it's not, the overhead is negligible. I don't think it has really a performance impact. Okay, are there any other questions? Oh, Alex asks, when I have new programmers, I give them the rule components never look up in the content tree. When this is needed, then this is done in a central, well-maintained place. Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. Yes, I would agree on that. Basically, this never look up the content tree. This goes along also with permission. So sometimes you have access to a lower, read access to a node deep inside the repo, but not up to higher nodes. Can sometimes occur, and of course that's a good thing. But essentially, this is a way of ensuring that you use this the central, well-maintained place, like here the abstraction, that you use a single way to do things and not many. Yeah, basically it's pretty much the same. Goes into the same direction. I think now we have covered all questions. So thank you for having me here. Thank you for joining my session. I really recommend you to build your models in the right way. And of course, always close your resource resolvers. Thank you. Have a nice session, nice day, and a nice adaptTo. Bye-bye.